The scene opens with a soft hum of ambient noise in an airport terminal. The camera slowly pans to Marcus, a young African-American man, standing in line at the gate. His face is unreadable, but there's a quiet tension in his eyes. He holds his boarding pass tightly, the crisp paper slightly creased in his hand. He walks towards the plane, his footsteps echoing softly as the hum of voices fades into the background. As he steps onto the plane, the flight attendant, with a polite yet firm expression, stops him. Flight attendant, "I'm sorry, sir, but your seat in business class has been reassigned. You'll need to take your seat in economy." Marcus stares, taken aback, his mind racing with confusion. "But I've got a business class ticket," he murmurs. The flight attendant simply nods, not offering any explanation, and directs him to the cramped aisle seat in the back of the plane. He sits down, his heart heavy, the sting of injustice cutting through the routine of air travel. As passengers file past, Marcus is left alone with the quiet, suffocating weight of what just happened. His gaze lingers on the empty business class section, the bright seats starkly empty, while he's forced to swallow the silent injustice of it all. Is this the price of simply being who you are? The scene shifts, and we find Marcus in his childhood home, sitting at the kitchen table. The dim light of the evening casts long shadows across the room. His mother, a strong and loving woman, sits across from him, a worried look on her face. "Mother, you know, Marcus, things won't always be easy for you. You'll have to work twice as hard just to be seen." Marcus looks up at her, his face tired but determined. "Marcus, but why, Mom? Why does it have to be this way? Why do they always see me as less?" His mother reaches out, gently placing her hand on his. "Mother, because the world isn't fair, son. But you can't let that stop you. You have to rise above it." Her words echoed in his mind as he went through his school years, where the weight of racial prejudice followed him like a shadow. At school, he was always the one left out, the one passed over for opportunities, the one teachers overlooked. Despite his grades, despite his efforts, Marcus was made to feel invisible. And every time, it was the same feeling, being dismissed simply because of the color of his skin. "Teacher, Marcus, maybe you should stick to the basics. You're just not cut out for advanced placement." The sting of those words hit harder than any test could. As he stood up to leave for his college interviews, Marcus felt that familiar lump in his throat, knowing that he was walking into yet another battle, a battle for his future. As Marcus stood at the front door of his family's home, the weight of what was ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. The acceptance letter to Harvard was in his hand, but the excitement he had imagined feeling was nowhere to be found. His mother's proud smile faded as he stood before her, silently holding the letter, still unsure of how to face what was coming. She had always told him that hard work would get him through, that if anyone deserved a chance, it was him. But now, the reality of the world outside was knocking on his door with all its harshness. "Mother, well, what's the verdict, son?" "Marcus, they sent me a letter. They accepted me." His voice cracked slightly, the weight of the words finally hitting him. His mother's eyes widened with joy, her face lighting up as she rushed to embrace him. "Mother, I knew you could do it. This is your time, Marcus." She pulled back and looked at him, concern creeping into her expression. "Mother, but you're still worried, aren't you?" "Marcus, I don't know, Mom. I'm scared. I'm afraid they only accepted me because they have to, or because I'm a token." His mother shook her head, her gaze softening as she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mother, you've earned your place there. They can't take that from you." But deep down, Marcus wasn't so sure. The lingering doubt hung over him like a shadow, the same one he'd carried with him for as long as he could remember. Weeks later, Marcus found himself in the waiting room of the prestigious law firm where he had hoped to secure a summer internship. His resume was impressive: honors courses, leadership roles, a volunteer mentor for underprivileged children. Still, in this high-end corporate building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about him, his race, perhaps, was going to hold him back. He'd learned to carry it silently, the constant burden of wondering if he was truly being judged for his merits, or if people were just seeing him as the black guy. The receptionist, a middle-aged white woman with glasses, gave him a polite but dismissive smile. She didn't make eye contact as she checked him in, and Marcus could feel the invisible wall forming between them. His stomach tightened as he took a seat, his legs shifting uncomfortably, his eyes scanning the other applicants, young, well-dressed, and predominantly white. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus was called into the interview room. He entered to find two senior partners sitting behind an imposing oak desk. Their stern faces looked him up and down with practiced indifference, barely hiding their curiosity about the young black man before them. Interviewer 1. Marcus, tell us about yourself. Marcus took a deep breath, focusing on the question, trying to push past the nerves that clawed at him. He had practiced this speech 1,000 times, but it felt different now. His words, though confident, carried a weight that he couldn't ignore. Marcus, I've worked hard to get here. I've taken on leadership roles in my community, helped lead a mentorship program for at-risk youth, and I'm passionate about creating positive change through the law. The interviewers nodded, but their eyes darted between each other as if searching for something, evaluating him not just on his words, but on who he was, what he was. Interviewee 2. And why law, Marcus? What makes you want to pursue this path? Marcus felt the familiar sting of the question. They weren't asking about his accomplishments. They were asking why he, a young man of color, thought he had the right to sit at their table. Marcus, I believe the law can be a tool for justice, and I want to use it to fight for people who have been silenced, people like me. The response hung in the air, and he could feel the temperature in the room drop slightly. The interviewers exchanged another glance, their faces unreadable. Marcus' chest tightened as they continued their cold questioning. When the interview ended, they shook his hand with little warmth, their faces unreadable. As Marcus walked out, the receptionist gave him a nod, but it felt hollow, as if his presence in the room had not been significant enough to matter. That night, sitting on the porch, Marcus stared out at the moonlit sky, his mind racing. He had done everything right. He had worked harder than anyone he knew. And yet, when it came down to it, the doors that had opened to so many others seemed to be closing just a little bit for him. The next day, he received the email from the law firm. The rejection was swift as expected, but it still stung. Another reminder that, for all his efforts, the world didn't always see him as he saw himself. Marcus had worked tirelessly to get where he was. After receiving his degree, he landed a job at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. He thought that this was the moment when his dreams would finally align with his hard work. Yet, as he sat in his sterile office, reviewing case files, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd been at the firm for 6 months now, and with each passing day, the weight of subtle discrimination grew heavier. One afternoon, Marcus was in a meeting with the senior partners and several other associates. They were discussing a new case, a high-profile lawsuit involving a major corporation. Marcus, knowing the details better than anyone in the room, raised his hand and began to outline a strategy that could potentially lead to a favorable outcome for the client. Marcus, if we take a more aggressive stance on the preliminary motions, we can push them to settle earlier. It would save the company both time and money. He felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. Their expressions were polite, but there was a lack of enthusiasm, even though his suggestion made perfect sense. It wasn't the first time he had been ignored during meetings, but today, something about the coldness in the room felt more personal. Senior partner, I'm not sure that's the approach we're looking for, Marcus. We've always played it safe. Let's go with the traditional method. The partner's dismissive tone was laced with an undertone Marcus couldn't ignore, something unspoken but palpable. The rest of the room nodded in agreement, the conversation quickly shifting away from his idea. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to keep his frustration in check. It was moments like this that reminded him of his place. He had worked harder than anyone to get here, and yet his ideas, his contributions, were overlooked, sometimes even ignored completely. It wasn't just a professional slight, it felt like a personal attack. He was a token hire, someone who had been brought in to fill a diversity quota, but not truly considered part of the team. Later that day, Marcus was summoned to his boss's office. William, one of the senior partners, greeted him with his usual forced politeness. William, Marcus, I wanted to talk about your performance. You've been doing fine, but I've noticed you seem a bit distracted during meetings. Is everything all right? Marcus's heart sank. He knew exactly what William meant. He wasn't being distracted, he was being silenced. Marcus, I'm doing my best, William. I just feel like my input isn't being valued. There, he said it. For the first time, he confronted the reality of what had been bothering him for months. William, smirking, I think you need to understand the dynamics here, Marcus. This is a very high-stakes environment. It's about fitting in. It's not just about having good ideas, it's about presenting them the right way. The subtle implications were clear. Marcus's race, his voice, weren't considered part of the right way. Walking back to his desk, Marcus felt the walls of the office closing in around him. The success he had worked so hard for was beginning to feel hollow, like a facade. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that no matter how much he did, no matter how many achievements he ticked off his list, it would never be enough. His phone buzzed, another rejection email from a conference he'd applied to speak at. He had submitted an outline months ago, one that had been praised by his colleagues, but yet again, they had passed him over. Another door closed, and it was becoming clearer that the doors that had opened to him were only open as far as they needed to be, but never wide enough for him to step through completely. He sat there, staring at the email, feeling the weight of the world pressing against his chest. Was it even worth it? Was all his effort in vain? Just then his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his mother. "Marcus, remember, you're doing this for all of us. Don't let them take your dreams." It was a simple message, but it hit him harder than any rejection letter or condescending remark from a colleague. His mother's words gave him the strength to get up from his desk. He wasn't going to give up, not yet. The weight of the past few months felt like an anchor around Marcus's chest. He had been at the firm for almost a year now, and despite his hard work and the countless late nights, it felt like he was still on the outside looking in. The same patterns kept repeating themselves. His ideas were dismissed, his contributions ignored, and every time he tried to assert himself, the unspoken tension in the room seemed to shut him down. It was the morning of the biggest meeting of his career so far. A major client was in town, and the senior partners had gathered to discuss a multi-million-dollar deal that could make or break the firm. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this presentation. His research was impeccable, his strategy well thought out, and yet, as he stood in front of the room, ready to present his ideas, something in the air felt off. Senior Partner 1. "All right, let's hear it, Marcus. What do you have for us?" Marcus took a deep breath, holding his notes tightly in his hands. He had practiced this moment for days, but as the eyes of his colleagues fell upon him, the pressure began to mount. His heart raced in his chest, but he steadied his voice. "Marcus, I've reviewed the client's history, and I believe we should approach them with a more aggressive settlement offer. The key is to show them we're willing to push back harder than they expect." He paused, trying to gauge their reactions, but his words seemed to hang in the air, unacknowledged. Senior Partner 2, coldly, "Well, I think we should stick with what we know. Let's not risk shaking things up too much, Marcus. We've always taken the conservative route." The dismissal hit Marcus harder than he expected. His stomach tightened as he glanced around the room. His colleagues, all white, exchanged glances, clearly preferring the safer approach. It wasn't the first time his ideas had been ignored, but something about the tone today felt more pointed, more personal. Marcus stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to suppress the rage bubbling inside him. He had worked harder than anyone in that room, and yet, once again, his voice was nothing more than a whisper against the noise of their indifference. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his expression neutral, refusing to show any vulnerability. "Marcus, softly, I understand, but I truly believe this could give us the edge we need to win this case. The client is expecting innovation, not just the same old strategy." His words felt like they were falling on deaf ears. The senior partners were already moving on to the next point, ignoring him entirely. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as they began discussing the next agenda item. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, he questioned if he could keep doing this. After the meeting, Marcus walked back to his office, his mind racing. He had given everything to the firm, but it felt like he was just another cog in the machine, a token hire brought in to meet diversity quotas, but never truly allowed to lead. The rejection, once again, was suffocating. His ambition, his intelligence, seemed meaningless here, reduced to just a footnote. As he passed by the break room, he overheard two colleagues talking in low voices. Colleague 1. "Can you believe Marcus tried to pitch that aggressive strategy? I mean, who does he think he is?" Colleague 2. "Yeah, the guy's a little too eager for my taste. He needs to know his place." The words struck Marcus like a slap to the face. He knew they didn't see him as an equal, but hearing it so blatantly made something inside him snap. Later that day, as Marcus sat in his office, staring at the rejection email for yet another conference he had applied to speak at, he felt the weight of it all pressed down on him. Was he doomed to be invisible, no matter how much he worked, no matter how much he achieved? He took out his phone and typed a quick message to his mother. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. It feels like I'm just wasting my time." She replied almost instantly, "Don't let them steal your dreams, Marcus. You've always been meant for more than this. Don't give up." He stared at the words for a long moment, her encouragement a small flicker of light in his overwhelming darkness. Marcus stood up, pacing around the office. The weight of everything he had been through, the constant rejection, the dismissals, the feeling of never being good enough, was unbearable. But as the words from his mother echoed in his mind, a small spark of defiance began to ignite within him. Maybe he wasn't done yet. Maybe it wasn't about fitting in. Maybe it was time to make them listen. Marcus sat alone in his small apartment that evening, the weight of the day pressing heavily on him. The rejection letter from the law firm sat untouched on his desk, the words on it blurring together as he stared at it. He had done everything right. His grades had been perfect, his interviews stellar, yet here he was, still facing the same roadblocks he had faced since high school. Despite his best efforts, he was left with nothing but empty words and promises. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his mother. "Marcus, I know things seem tough, but remember who you are. You've come so far. Don't let them win." He smiled sadly at the message. His mother had always been his rock, her words a balm for his bruised soul. But today, her words didn't feel like enough. He had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, yet it never seemed to matter. He felt the sting of rejection deeply now. Each slight, each moment where he was passed over or dismissed, felt heavier than the last. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much he did, no matter how many hoops he jumped through, it would never be enough. His gaze fell on a photograph of his younger self with his mother, taken before the world had taught him what it meant to be other. He remembered the optimism he once carried, the belief that if he worked hard enough, nothing would stop him. But as the years wore on, that belief had been chipped away piece by piece, until all that was left was the quiet, persistent feeling of inadequacy. He ran his fingers over the frame of the photo, a reminder of the boy who once dreamed without limits. He longed to feel that hope again, to believe in his potential without being burdened by the weight of the world's expectations. Marcus stood up from his chair and walked over to the window, looking out at the city that had both shaped and betrayed him. The city lights flickered in the distance, a sea of people, all racing towards something, some fleeting goal. But for him, the path ahead seemed unclear. He had spent so long fighting to be seen, fighting to be acknowledged, but he had never stopped to ask himself what he really wanted. As he looked out at the horizon, a thought crossed his mind. What if it wasn't about fitting in anymore? What if the fight wasn't about trying to prove his worth to a system that would never fully accept him? What if the real battle was about forging his own path, one where he could define success on his own terms? He grabbed his phone, typing out a quick reply to his mother. "I'm not giving up. I'm just trying to figure out what's next." He sat there for a moment, his finger hovering over the screen, before hitting send. Marcus leaned against the windowsill, a deep breath escaping his lips. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this defeat define him. He had come too far, fought too hard, and had too much to offer to let this be the end of his story. The reflection in the glass staring back at him was no longer just a man beaten down by the world. It was someone who had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity, who had the strength to keep moving forward. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a spark of hope deep within him. A spark that, no matter how dim it had seemed, had never completely gone out. The next step was his to take. The night was quiet, but inside Marcus's mind, a storm raged. He had spent hours drafting and refining his speech, pacing back and forth in his apartment, trying to find the right words. It had been months since he'd felt this strongly about anything. Months since he'd felt like he could do something meaningful, something that could actually change the way people saw him, and others like him. The invitation to speak at the community rally had come as a surprise. At first, he thought about turning it down. After all, he wasn't a public speaker. He was just someone who'd been struggling to find his place in a world that seemed determined to keep him on the outside. But then he realized he had been fighting for so long to be heard. If he could stand up in front of this crowd, maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The day of the rally arrived. The large hall was buzzing with energy, families, students, workers, all there for a common cause. The air was thick with anticipation, and Marcus could feel his nerves tighten as he walked to the stage. The rally organizers gave him an encouraging nod, but it didn't ease his heartache. This wasn't just another speech. This was his moment. This was his chance to take a stand for everything he had endured and everything he still hoped to achieve. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. The weight of so many eyes on him made his throat tighten, but he refused to let the fear take control. He looked out into the crowd, seeing faces of all ages, races, and backgrounds, all with one thing in common: the desire for change. Marcus, I stand before you today not as someone who has already won, but as someone who has been pushed to the edge, someone who has been told time and time again that I don't belong, that I'm not enough. But I'm here to tell you that I am enough. We are enough. He paused, letting his words settle in the air, before continuing. Marcus, I've spent my life trying to fit into spaces that were never made for me. I've worked harder than anyone to prove my worth, only to be told that my voice doesn't matter, that my ideas aren't valid. I've been silenced by people who think that because of the color of my skin, I am not entitled to the same opportunities. But I am here today to tell you that I will no longer be silent. The room remained silent, but the energy shifted. People were listening. Marcus felt the strength of their attention, their collective breath held as they waited for him to speak the words they needed to hear. Marcus, I'm tired of asking for permission. I'm tired of waiting for someone to tell me that I deserve to be heard. We have all been waiting too long. But now we take our own power. We make our own space. We fight for the future we deserve, not the one they've tried to carve out for us. His words, once tinged with doubt and uncertainty, were now fueled by something deeper, something more powerful than any rejection he had faced before. His voice was steady, clear, each sentence cutting through the air like a promise. Marcus could feel the warmth of their support, the nods and murmurs of agreement that flowed from the crowd. Marcus, this is not just my fight. This is all of our fight. We are stronger when we stand together. The world will try to break us down, but we will rise. We will rise not because of their validation, but because of our own determination, our own worth. As he finished, the room erupted into applause, the sound deafening, overwhelming. Marcus stood there, stunned for a moment, as the roar of the crowd surrounded him. Tears stung his eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer power of the moment. He had never felt more alive, more connected to something greater than himself. In that moment, he knew that this was why he had endured everything he had. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been told they were less than, for every voice that had been silenced, for every dream that had been crushed beneath the weight of prejudice. As the applause slowly died down, Marcus felt a calm settle over him. He had taken a stand. He had used his voice not just to be heard, but to make a real difference. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt that he wasn't alone. And that was enough to keep moving forward. Years passed, and Marcus found himself standing at the front of a packed auditorium, looking out over the sea of faces. His once unsteady hands, the same hands that trembled when he first took the stage at the community rally, now rested calmly at his sides. The weight of the years, the struggles, the countless rejections, and the battles he had fought were still with him, but they no longer felt like chains. They had shaped him into someone different, someone stronger. In the years since that pivotal speech, Marcus had found his voice, and with it, a path that no longer required validation from the world he had tried so hard to fit into. He had left the corporate law firm behind, a place where his worth had always been questioned, and instead, started his own nonprofit organization dedicated to providing mentorship and resources to underserved communities. He was no longer asking for a seat at the table. He was building his own. The journey had been far from easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the weight of it all threatened to pull him under. But through it all, he had remained steadfast, knowing that his work mattered, that his voice mattered, and that the change he sought to create was worth every sacrifice. That day, in the auditorium filled with young faces eager to hear his words, Marcus was about to give a keynote address at the annual conference for the organization he had built from the ground up. The crowd was a mix of young professionals, students, and community leaders, all looking for inspiration, just as Marcus had once searched for it. As he walked up to the podium, the applause was deafening. It wasn't the kind of applause that was given out of obligation or courtesy. This was different. This was the kind of applause that came from the hearts of people who knew his story, who had witnessed his growth and transformation. It was a recognition not of his position, but of the journey he had undertaken. Marcus, thank you all. When I first began this journey, I didn't know where it would take me. I didn't know if I was cut out for this work. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered something my mother always told me. She said, "Don't let them steal your dreams, Marcus. You have a voice, and you've earned your place." He paused, looking out over the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He could feel the truth of those words deep in his chest. It had taken him years to fully understand the power they held. Marcus, I've been rejected. I've been overlooked. I've been told that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. But I didn't listen to them. And I'm standing here today not because of their acceptance, but because I refused to accept being silenced. I refused to let anyone define my worth for me. The room fell into a hushed silence as his words resonated with the crowd. Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of all the struggles, all the triumphs, and everything in between. He had built something lasting, something meaningful, and it wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't matter, like they were invisible. Marcus, this organization, this movement, is bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us. It's about giving people the tools, the opportunities, and the belief that they can achieve anything, no matter the odds stacked against them. It's about showing them that their dreams are valid and that they are deserving of every opportunity the world has to offer. He let the words sink in. For Marcus, this wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of everything he had fought for. It was a testament to the power of perseverance and the belief that change was possible, even in a world that often seemed determined to resist it. As the crowd erupted into applause once again, Marcus felt a surge of pride wash over him. It wasn't pride in his accomplishments, but pride in the impact he had made. He had turned his pain into purpose, his setbacks into strength, and now he was leading others to do the same. Marcus, I want each of you to remember this. No matter how many times you are told no, no matter how many doors close in your face, you have the power to open your own doors. You don't need permission to dream. You don't need permission to succeed. It's yours to claim. As the applause continued, Marcus stepped back from the podium, his heart swelling with emotion. He had taken a stand, not just for himself, but for a community, for a movement, and for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. He had found his place in the world, not by fitting into someone else's mold, but by forging his own path. The journey was far from over, but as Marcus stood there, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, he knew that he had done more than just change his own story. He had helped change the stories of countless others, and for that he was grateful. As the conference came to a close, Marcus stood by the exit, shaking hands, exchanging words of encouragement with the attendees. He saw their faces, hopeful, inspired, ready to take on the world. And he realized that, in the end, that was the true measure of success. Not how far he had come, but how far others would go because of the example he had set. Marcus, this is just the beginning. And with that, he stepped out into the future, undaunted, unwavering, and ready for whatever came next. Marcus's journey teaches us a profound lesson about resilience, self-worth, and the relentless pursuit of justice. From the moment he stepped into the corporate world, the doors were closed to him, not because of his abilities, but because of the color of his skin. He faced rejection, ridicule, and exclusion at every turn, yet he refused to let those barriers define him. He learned, often the hard way, that his value was not determined by the opinions of others, but by his own belief in himself. What truly stands out in Marcus's story is the moment of reflection, the turning point where he realized that his fight wasn't just for acceptance. It was for his right to carve out a space for himself in a world that had tried to silence him. His decision to leave behind a system that only saw him as a token hire, and instead build something meaningful for himself and others, is a powerful message. True change comes from within. The lesson here is clear. We must never allow the world's prejudice to diminish our sense of self. No matter the setbacks or the doubts others cast on us, our worth is inherent, and it is up to us to claim it. Marcus could have given up, could have let the discrimination and the systemic barriers break him, but instead he took a stand. He used his voice, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. As we reflect on Marcus's story, let it remind us that the power to change our circumstances lies within us. We must never stop fighting for what we deserve, and we must always rise, no matter how many times we're knocked down. Marcus's journey is a powerful reminder of the strength it takes to fight against prejudice and overcome adversity. Have you ever faced discrimination or witnessed someone else do so? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from that experience? Do you believe that standing up for yourself can truly change the world, or is it just one step in a much bigger movement? Share your thoughts, and let's discuss how we can all contribute to a more inclusive and just society. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this story if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right.